All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in to Wisdom for the Church. I am joined by a special guest, Jared Longshore, who I've been looking to talk to for a little while, and he's been gracious enough to give us some of his time. So, Jared, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself? Where are you, and what do you do?
Yeah. So Jared Longshore, married to my wife Heather. We have 7 kids. I live in Moscow, Idaho, and have a couple different jobs. My main labors are serving as a minister of Christ Church here in Moscow, and I also am the dean and a fellow of theology at New St. Andrews College, which is also housed here in Moscow, and have been here for just over 2 years, serving in these stations.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha. And New St. Andrews, is that like classical Christian education?
Yeah, it's a liberal arts and humanities Christian college here in Moscow. So, kind of one track for all of our students. Our mission is to graduate leaders who will shape culture by living faithful lives under the lordship of Christ. And yeah, it's an impressive lot. They jump right into their freshman year in a class, and they basically take 4 classes their freshman year. The first is lordship, and I teach half of our freshmen, and then Joe Rigney is the name that people might know. He came over from Bethlehem College and Seminary, where he was serving in Minneapolis. He teaches the other half of the freshman lordship, which is kind of like a worldview and apologetics class. Some of the Moscow distinctives are covered in that particular class. So they'll take lordship, they'll take Latin, they take rhetoric, they take music. But
Okay.
then language heavy, so they have to take 3 years of classical language. So that's a doozy for most people.
Yeah.
But
Is
yeah, it's a
that like,
great.
is it specific languages that they'll look at, or?
Mainly they're going to be doing Latin,
Okay. Thought
but
so.
Greek, Hebrew, and Middle English are also options that several students take advantage of.
Okay. Wow. So no small endeavor going on at the college then, shaping a group of
Yeah,
Christians.
yeah, it's remarkable to see what's going on here with New St. Andrews. Yeah, it's a very good work.
Yeah. Well, that's a good little launching point then for us before we get into our topic of the interview, which is basically civil engagement and maybe some political thoughts about Christians in our nation these days. A little backstory of how I found out about you. I probably 6 years ago or so just stumbled upon Founders Ministries Founders podcast. Saw you on
Yep.
there, and I thought, wow, this is like really. They are teaching from a biblical perspective on here and now important political and cultural, just moral issues of our day from a biblical worldview. And I thought, man, that was incredible and very helpful at the time. And then I saw, oh, he moved out west. So
Way out west.
yeah, way out west. So you're 3 hours away from me. So it might still be light outside where you are. I don't know. But what brought kind of the move out there? Are you still in touch with, I guess it would be Tom Askell? I'm sure you guys are still in great terms and everything, but what kind of brought that move?
Yeah, I think the world of Tom and the Founders in Grace Baptist Church, which I served for many years down there in Southwest Florida.
Okay.
And the journey was wild, right? I mean, it was. The substance of the matter is, I really did become convinced of Paedo Baptist covenant theology, and I became convinced of baptizing
Okay.
infants, which is a wild revelation for me. But that was tied in with all of the cultural work that we were doing, certainly laboring for reformation in the church and reformation in the civil realm as well. So, as you mentioned, kind of when it comes to the relationship between Christianity and the state, we are certainly in the Reformed and evangelical world in a big moment, right? We just had the MSNBC Politico clip of Heidi. I don't remember her name. I just dropped a piece on my. I just dropped a blog on on the website where I write, jaredrlongshore.com, about this, basically saying we're all
Okay.
Christian nationalists now,
Okay.
because we're dealing with the inescapable concept here that um, that obviously our society is going to have to be ordered according to
Something.
Christianity, and there's no doubt that, say, the different traditions between a more Credo Baptist understanding and a more Pado Baptist understanding have different takes on the relationship between the church and the state. And so that was a weird. All of that's kind of like, there's all kinds of ideas that are kind of baked into that led to my big transition. But in a nutshell, I wouldn't have ended up in Moscow, Idaho, if I hadn't become convinced of infant baptism. That was a big
Gotcha.
change in my life, and is what how basically how I got here.
Okay. Yeah. I had not heard that backstory really. So I appreciate you sharing that with those who tune into Wisdom for the Church. I don't know exactly what denominational lines really every last person who ever watches a video falls into. So that's definitely interesting information. Appreciate you sharing that. Well, we'll get into a little bit about topic today. We'll start here. You can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but when it comes to social change, it seems like within evangelicalism and even maybe reformed circles, there is a look but don't touch approach, or you can diagnose but maybe don't do too much about civil sphere, politics, social change. Have you ever sensed that before in maybe conservative Christian circles? And if so, I want to wind the clock back. Do you think that social justice took advantage of that a few years back, if that's the case? Long question there.
Yeah. So to answer the back end, absolutely, social justice took advantage of that, and absolutely, you put your finger on a hallmark of the evangelical world, which is strange. I studied at Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and I still remember back in my master's level work, reading Kevin DeYoung's book, "The Mission of God," that I think he wrote with Greg Gilbert, who is pastor, was at least was a pastor there in Louisville, Kentucky, and I remember reading the book and really liking it, but the emphasis was that we don't bring in the kingdom of God. God is the one who brings in His kingdom, and we pray in the Lord's prayer, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And we need to know that we are not the ones who kind of initiate this change and all that. And I was just, I mean, I was Reformed, I was Calvinistic, I was like, well, amen. This all makes sense to me. Don't get caught up in that political stuff. And there's bad examples in the evangelical world. So you have like the mega church, Trump flag, American flag in the sanctuary kind of guys.
Yeah.
Um, got an inappropriate kind of God and country, and anemic, maybe reductionistic evangelical God and country. Like there's a lady in the front row draped in the American flag on Sunday, and then there's a
Yeah.
there's a right, like, oh, we're Reformed and we're doctrinal, and we're not going to get into that business. Um, but it's also interesting because even in my doctoral studies at Southern, the Bevington Quadrilateral, which is kind of like the fancy four hallmarks of evangelicalism. One of them is activism.
Hmm.
So, like, to call yourself an evangelical is to some degree say, yes, I'm in this tradition that is concerned with activism. But it's almost like the activism of the evangelical church, the modern Reformed evangelical world is no longer comfortable with. It's like, yeah, well, look at the YMCA's and look at the Salvation Army and look what happened to those kind of things. So we're not gonna engage in that space anymore. So I think it's become, in large, separatist. And separatist is a strange word. It's like ecclesiologically separatists. So this idea of like a visible church, of this blocky entity that is a presence in society,
Yeah.
that the civil realm is going to have to acknowledge to some degree. Um, that's really forsaken for an inner heavenly spiritual life. And so we disregard externals and we disregard earth. Now, when someone hears me say that, there's going to be a lot of good, solid Christians, evangelical American Christians, conservatives that say, yeah, but there's a lot of Bible verses, Jared, that say that talk about the heart and that talk about the spirituality and that talk about don't set your mind on earthly things but on heavenly things, and all of that's true. So I'm not saying that we should disregard inner life and spiritual life and heavenly life. I'm
Yeah.
saying we have bought into the problem that Francis Schaeffer talked about in his book Escape from Reason. We have bought into what I call the Schaefferian dichotomy. He talks about this dichotomy where we've said the heavenly things are up in the heavens,
Yep.
the earthly things are down here, and our faith, all of the religious stuff is up in the heavens, and
Yeah.
we'll just get along down here on earth. And two problems can come from that. You could have that Schaefferian dichotomy and say, so when it comes to the things of earth, I just don't care, like whatever. I'm pulled out from it. Or you could say, well, since my faith is up in the heavens, I think I'll get to whatever kind of pragmatic solutions are necessary to get this political operation to manifest itself, right? And so you no longer have the word of God and the truth of God informing how you're engaging in society. Yeah. But you're right to say all that to say, yes, there's a massive neglect. And yes, there was a vacuum then because Christians weren't actually building out their political theology, and you had the crazy social justice nonsense that has come about in American society over the last handful of years.
Yeah. I mean, you said a whole bunch of things there, but I think that was very helpful. The way that you put you mentioned the Francis Schaeffer thing. Like, I think I kind of remember what you're talking about, upper story, things of spirituality and things of ultimate meaning and God. And then you have the quote unquote lower story, like the material realm and just the day-to-day way that we live our lives. And somehow we've become convinced that those two things should not interact, or at least maybe the public sphere rather. Things of religion should just stay within the heart, and maybe it affects how you live your personal life, but it's not like a public sort of a thing that rubs shoulders with other people in society. So yeah, that was really good stuff, and I asked that question, just because it felt like there was a vacuum, and because there was this vacuum where you can look, don't touch, basically. Once something comes that looks pretty good, you're kind of famished. Like a social justice looks like it has some pretty good solutions to society. Like, we need to care about all of these alleged injustices, alleged disparities, and this and that and the other. And it's like, well, if I've been famished in terms of this kind of an application, and then this thing comes that looks pretty good, my appetite, at least from my vantage point, my appetite was naturally going to be like, yes, let's go for this. And at least in my opinion, that happened like maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. That indeed has happened. And I think my sense is that conservative Christians have, to a large degree, uprooted it. And I think we're dealing with a different scenario now. I mean, obviously it's still a thing. If you watched the He Gets Us ad from the Super Bowl, where you had all of the have-nots having their feet washed by the haves, at least in the majority of those clips. So it's still a thing. I think that yet ending racism, like painted in the end zone of the Super Bowl. So you had that. You still have it on a social level and on a national level, but my suspicion is that it's been by and large uprooted, which is good, but I don't know that we have a clue what we're supposed to do next.
Yeah. And that is a perfect, really, you could not have transitioned better in this conversation. So before we get to maybe a positive vision then about, we know, that gets to my first question a little bit. Like, I think the way that it seemed to be an unwritten rule within maybe conservatism and even maybe just conservative evangelicalism, when I say look but don't touch, I mean, we are still, and I have plenty of examples of, you're allowed to diagnose problems brilliantly. Like, have you heard of? I'm sure you've heard of the briefing by Al Mohler.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying he does this, but like his briefing is a brilliant diagnosis of problems and understanding
Hmm.
where they come from a lot of times, all these things. And so I've heard a lot of those things, but to your kind of point, the positive vision, it always kind of seemed like, well, you idolize politics if you care even slightly about like forging a solution toward this sort of thing. Um,
Hmm.
anyway, that's an impression that I got. But before we get into your positive vision or some thoughts on a positive vision, if you were to say, what are some go-to sections of scripture where you find a good foundation for Christian civil engagement? Are there any biblical foundations that your mind runs to in scripture where you see here are some great examples of where we should be looking?
Yeah, that's a good question. Here's what we need to do. It's the whole book.
It's the whole book. Okay, writing it down.
So, whole book. This is this is the setup. You're going to have people that are like, well, these are the spiritual texts. Go there when you need your soul nourished, and
Yeah.
then these are the dominion texts. So go to the book of Joshua because they conquer the promised land. Um, but there's a problem with that arrangement. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created. What
Hmm.
did He create? The heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth. Should you be concerned with both?
Yeah.
Of course you should. Of course you should. He made both, right? And He put man in a garden to work it and to keep it. And so you just have to. You would just really need to steep yourself in the book of Genesis, and then let the book of Genesis, let the creation of the Creator have its full impact as you read through the Bible.
Hmm.
You are saved soul and body. Christ has not only come to save your soul, but that your body also would be redeemed. Of course, your body is going to be resurrected on the last day. He's not only come to save you as an individual, he's come to constitute a new humanity. There's actually a new humanity being constituted. There is a new temple that is being built up. And so um, what I want to do is get Christians to break that faulty hermeneutic that they have, which says, I'll cherry pick. This is a spiritual text to help with my soul, and this is a text to help with my political engagement.
Hmm.
No, that's going to have to be fully integrated in the way that you approach the scriptures.
Hmm. Okay. So thinking through hermeneutics. Yeah, and you do make a tremendous point, the fact that we are body and soul and that we're not called to just focus on one thing or another, but remembering that we are in God's world and God gives us really the dominion mandate back in the early parts of Genesis. That it's a very foundational part of being human is seeing your hands put to something and seeing good things created for God's glory, and passing that down onto those after you, right? Um,
Yeah.
so you mentioned based on the he gets us ad in the Super Bowl, and that's kind of your typical wokeness, you might say. Like you think that that's a lot of ways been uprooted, but there's something new on the horizon or something different to think about. Was that you mentioning the positive vision standpoint, or is there sort of a different problem that you're seeing that's come more recently?
No, I'm saying that he gets us sad is interesting because it's just a reminder that it's not like wokeness is driven out of our nation.
Yeah,
It's not like
like
cultural Marxism and all the fights that the Christians have been through. I'd say over I don't know the last 6 years. How many years has it been? I don't know,
yeah,
something like that. The Christian church has dealt with that error, and that's good, but it's still present out there in the world.
yeah,
And your point about a positive vision is really good. I think you make a good point about um, Al Mohler's briefing. It is a briefing on the news,
yeah,
right? And that's good. We really like that. It's good to know what's going on in the world, but it is a different thing to say it's what we need to do about it. And
yes,
here's the next hill we're going to take. And so there was an MSNBC crew that came out and did an interview here in Moscow, and it was stated very publicly that we want to make this town a Christian town, and that
Yeah.
makes people, that makes like American Christians, even conservative ones, go, "What? Isn't that like some kind of nationalistic, theocratic something something?" And we say, no, it's just like, but then there's ways to get people to think it through. They say, well, what do you do when like the majority of your town worships the Lord on Sunday and
Yeah.
decides to like rest from their work and the restaurant that you like isn't opened? Um, or what do you do when your civil authority becomes a Christian? And he really is like, no, I'm converted. I want to honor Jesus in my work. Do you have something to tell him what that would look like? Do you know what that would look like? Right. Well, obviously, it would look like getting the abortion, the laws that permit abortion off the books. Why don't we start there?
Yeah.
But then we can build from there about the things that we're going to do, an actual active plan on the political front. But there are so many levels to this particular problem that we could spend forever just mining out why American evangelicals, by and large, don't have a plan. They
Yep.
do not have a plan, and there's because our instincts are all wrong. One is community. You're going to have a community, and I don't mean a silly community, which is probably what most of the American Christians are up to. Like, I don't mean another like discipleship group or small group. Yes, you need those, and those are great. But I'm talking about like an actual like lived in community where you are with a bunch of other Christians that have the same convictions, that
Mhm.
are all pulling in the same direction because you have a particular goal in mind. Like, you at
Yeah.
least have a sense of what it is that you're aiming at. What would it look like if Reformation actually happened? And are you among those people? Like, do
Mhm.
you have other families that you're looking at in the community and go, yeah, I could marry my daughter off to one of those boys? Like, are you actually thinking through generational faithfulness and what it's going to look like in a particular context?
Yeah.
That's something that our individualistic assumptions don't really like to consider, right? And then the very structure of society. I mean, the 1960s have absolutely ravaged um, the structure of our society. There's a Gay Liberation Manifesto back in those days that said we need a complete social revolution, a complete destruction of the patriarchal society. Okay, so we live in the wake of that kind of revolution. And are you at all interested in changing it?
Yeah.
Are you at all interested? And what is it actually going to look like to rebuild on the ruins when it comes to, say, the structure of society and the way men and women work and operate together? You're going to need leaders who go, okay, we're going to have to see change in the Christian church as they grow up and mature into what they need to be. Um, so there's a legal dimension, there's a community dimension, there's a worship dimension. Like, what does it mean to actually worship? So if you take um, Elijah on Mount Carmel,
Mhm.
right? Like, when he worshipped the Lord and when he prepared the sacrifice, God answered by fire, and the result was the prophets of Baal were destroyed.
Yeah.
And are we worshiping the Lord? Do we have a conception of worship that entails something like that, where
Mhm.
we're actually believing that we're worshiping the living God who is actually establishing his kingdom on earth? And
Yeah.
so the worship of God is a part of the plan of renewal and reformation. Or is it merely the thing you do as an individual to have your cup refilled, right? And
Yeah.
and to have some kind of therapeutic result. Now, I'm not saying, of course, we are reoriented and we are blessed and strengthened as we worship the Lord. Of course, we are. But is there a vision that says no? What we need to do is establish an outpost of worship in that community that is pagan, and
Mm.
and that outpost of worship is going to serve as the church of the living God, that's going to strengthen the saints such that they exercise dominion and actually change the culture and change society. I think those instincts on worship, law, community, roles of manhood and womanhood, how society should be structured. I don't. I think we've got work to do on all those fronts if we're actually going to see a plan instituted.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, you definitely said a whole lot in that one, but it was all very, really helpful stuff. So, I mean, you mentioned something that I can definitely say with conviction, I'm convicted about, and that is essentially that our instincts, in many ways, are backward. And I don't know if you were talking about this specifically, but even when I just think about doing something together with other Christians that is strategic and maybe, long lasting in terms of planning and taking dominion and, thinking through economics together or thinking through, building families together and these types of things. Like my instincts, I think, have been trained over time just to think about, well, basically everything is constantly going to only get worse in our nation, constantly, 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 constantly. So I just have to hold on and be faithful. And that's about as much energy as I have. And I don't know if that is how everyone thinks. And, that could just be more of a me thing, but I get the sense that that's a big thing. Basically, our instincts have been just try and play defense against whatever cultural craze is coming, whatever it is, like whatever sexual revolution is on the horizon, whatever sort of racial tension is on the horizon, whatever kind of new idea is on the horizon. Let's just play defense and maybe we can just keep it away for a while. But, the more I think about it, that's just not how sin is stopped. A little leaven leavens the whole lump.
Right.
Sin
Right.
is conquered by the light, sin is conquered by the truth. And yeah, I mean, again, I say this because I've been convicted by these kind of thoughts, and I'm not one who has nearly the thought process lined up to say, therefore we shall. But I'm trying to learn from people that have put more ink to the paper or whatever on the
Yeah,
subject.
yeah. John Owen says that in his Mortification of Sin. He says, "What? How does the Spirit go about killing your sin?" Well, the first thing that he does is he puts his fruit. He puts his fruit into you.
Hmm.
The first thing he does is not, necessarily. I mean, yes, he takes up the sword and kills your sin, but it's you have this image when I say kill your sin. When you wear that John Owen shirt around that says "Be killing sin, or sin will be killing you." You have this image that the Spirit has taken up the sword and he's slaying your lust and your greed and all of that. And amen, he does that. But how does he do that? Well, one of the first thing he does is he's like a chef in the kitchen. He's cooking up all kinds of good things. He's filling you with his fruit, which and the flesh gets crowded out because of what you're producing. Christians were made to do good works and produce good works. And
Yep.
here's the fact. I mean, fact is we love this like we're gonna lose, let's just play defense thing because we're lazy.
Mhm.
We are just lazy.
You've sensed
People,
that though, like you've seen that before. You've kind of seen that.
oh
That's
yeah,
I mean, it's what we've been talking about.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's like produce a artifact. Pro- Christians should be producing things. Now, that
Yeah,
could be art, that could be a book, that could be a building, that could be children, that
yeah,
could be education in the minds of children to
yeah,
teach them instruction. It could be bread, and like you're supposed to
yep,
be producing
yeah.
these good works, and in so doing, that's how you that's how you're gonna have an active plan.
Who is
Not just, and I
more?
might just add, not just listen. Like, I tell everybody, like it doesn't matter what it is you're listening to. Um, there could be various podcasts you're listening to, various books you're reading. If all you're doing is listening, then
Yeah,
you're not doing it right. Right. Like you're supposed to do things.
yeah. Good works. That's that's the video.
Yeah.
Works. Yeah. So I mean, you mentioned something. It could be art. It could be a book. Like, who is more equipped than Christians to, by God's leading, produce beauty? and produce order and produce good things that help people, all these sorts of things. You mentioned like just baking bread or something. We have a God who is beauty, the objective source of beauty. We have a God who is the objective source of order. He established order and creation, all these things. And it's like, how can I not think that my life should go that way and produce that kind of fruit, which would
Yeah, and I
tangibly
imagine people.
see in society?
Yeah, one of the things that keep people from it is they're perfectionists, and so they think I'm never going to bake that bread because I'm going to burn it. I'm never going to write that book because every time I write a paragraph, I think, well, I could make it better.
Yeah.
And so I've spent 17 hours editing a paragraph. It's like, fire it off, man. Like, just let it go. I'm afraid to get married because could I do better?
Oh yeah.
You could go on and show the applications of how people don't do things because they're perfectionists, and that's just bad stuff. You need to put that away. Do Ask the Lord to bless it. Do a good work. Once you've done the good work, ask the Lord to bless it again, and go do another one.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nike, but in the strength of the Lord. Just do it.
Yeah, there you go.
You ever smoked a pipe, by the way?
Yeah.
Well, I need some tips because I tried that the other day. It wasn't a good work before the Lord, but I tried smoking a pipe, and it was something with the packing. I tried that, just do it, and man, did I fail. The second time I tried, though, I got like 2 good puffs. So
Practice makes perfect.
there we go. There we go. Um, so, we've talked a lot about positive vision. I talked at the beginning of the interview kind of about the most recent or second most recent sort of major problem that hit evangelicalism, which was social justice came to the door in terms of it being right at the door, probably like 2017, 2018. And by the time the door was opened, it was already standing there with a shotgun, and most were, wow, like, agree with me or you're racist. And not a lot of people saw it coming. Some did. But you've probably heard the name Vodi Bakum, right? In terms of practicality, he seemed to be on that problem before many were, or at least was vocal about it for like a few years before most were really vocal about it. The point I'm making is, it was in seed form for years and years and years and years and years. It was growing into this, larger fruit, this larger beast, and then it became this big beast or whatever. Are there any things, Jared, that you can see? You're not some prophet, but is there anything you see in our society? Oh, this is in seed form, but if it's not thought through and conquered, if Christians are not prepared, this is going to be a potential future beast. Does that make sense? Any sort of movements, ways of thinking, lifestyle choices,
Yep.
whatever that you see?
Sure, it makes perfect sense. And this justice movement. This is how we get to the seed. So it's related to the social justice stuff. The social justice movement is merely the judicial structure. It's the judicial theory of full-fledged paganism.
Hmm.
And it's the paganism that is still in seed form. So you could think of social justice itself was in seed form before it wasn't.
Yeah.
But now I'm telling you that there's actually a bigger, nasty root down there that's about to break through and is breaking through the earth. And that is outright paganism, which has multiple dimensions to it. So it has a certain anthropology, right? It certainly has a certain worldview. It has a certain judicial system. It has a certain take on a telos or an eschatology, a certain vision that it wants to instantiate
Like, where are we
into the
going?
world. So what I want Christians to see is what Abraham Kuyper said many, many years ago. He says the decision has always been and will be until the end Christianity or paganism, the idols or the living God. Which one are you going to take? And so that's very theoretical, not as practical, but it's actually Christians have to wake up to what that real problem is. And I think in so doing, they're going to discover um, what Christianity really is.
Hmm.
And the clearest place is going to be, I think, the next touch point. Obviously, is our how are we going to structure ourselves civilly. So Christian nationalism, mere Christendom, all of those kind of concepts. You're basically going. What was very interesting about this recent clip from that MSNBC panel is that the lady who said, you know, what unites all Christian nationalists is that they believe your rights come from God, not the state, not
Yeah.
Congress, and not the Supreme Court. And everybody just
Which
died laughing because you're like,
to
wait,
your point, you wrote the article, right? Like we're all therefore Christian nationalists, and
yeah, we're all
basically
Christian nationalists, and
because they're right, it does
we
come
get
from
this
God.
correct. And then if that does come from God, what this lady, Heidi was her name, what she was discovering, like, you know, basically what she was saying is, guys, if we believe our rights come from God, then it's probably true that our laws come from him too.
Yeah.
And if our rights come from him and our laws come from him, we probably owe him some kind of like civil allegiance. You know, I mean, if our rights come from him, like I feel like
Yeah.
she's against it, but she's trying to talk sense into everybody. Like, and if our rights come from him, we probably need to get our leaders from him too. Like, because we wouldn't want to have rights that come from him and leaders that don't.
Yeah.
That would create a conflict. I think I'm just postulating here, and so you're like, yeah, and then so the Christian church has to recognize we just basically have been living a lie, particularly since the 1960s and onward. It's the idea that you're going to have any kind of civil order that can just be in the void, that is not going to be looking to the triune God and his revelation, what he's revealed to us through the scriptures and what he's revealed to us through creation. If we're going to pretend that we can survive without a public acknowledgement of him all the way down, not some vague deity, not some deity that includes Islam, no, it's not going to happen. This is the Christian God, and this is historically the case. So the next battle, like now that we've done with intersectionality and social justice and wokeness, the next battle that the Christian church is going to face, and which is intimately related to the social justice stuff,
Yeah.
is how are you going to order your society? Are you going to be a Christian town, a Christian county, a Christian state, and a Christian nation? Or are you going to opt for the no, we disregard him in our civil dealings?
Yeah, yeah. Because if there's one thing that I have most definitely been convinced of recently, you know, in the last year or two, whatever, it's like our lives, but also the way that we live, and including laws, things like that, they have to have an actual foundation. And that foundation is going to be either the one true God or some other source of, you know, thing that I'm calling authority. Either that authority is me, or, you know, someone else, or some other way of thinking. But, you know, ultimately, there's only one who truly has authority, and one who is truly true and right and good and order and all of these things. And to not base our lives and, you know, laws, for example, off of him is going to most definitely be error. But I've definitely noticed that in the last little bit. It's like we have to have the conversation of who makes our society and where does our law come from, and why is a law, you know, good or bad? Like, and what should the penalty for something wrong done be? Like, if I've used an example in a video before, like, because again, I'm still thinking through a lot of these things, but it's like if someone is guilty of murder, what's the penalty? You know, do we just make it up? Is there biblical precedent for a real punishment? You know, I think so. Definitely death penalty. But, you know, we're just talking through these things, and it's like, well, if that's not my standard, if there's not at least some kind of general principle there, then it's kind of just up to who sounds the best at that point, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I may have time for like one more question.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. That was mostly what I wanted to cover. Really, is a smaller one at the end. If you were to recommend one or two books that you may have read before on either Christian ethics or Christian political theory, anything come to mind? If nothing does, it's fine. But
Yeah, along the lines of the social justice conversation we've been having, I edited a book for Founders Ministries called "By What Standard."
mm,
So I contributed a couple chapters in there. Vodi Bakum, who you mentioned, contributed some chapters in there, and so it's like a collection of essays. That would be a good resource. Um, and then beyond that, I would cite Pastor Doug Wilson, who's out here in Moscow. He has written a book. This is a very practical book on cultural reformation called "Rules for Reformers."
okay.
So basically, if you're thinking through what is actually going to look like to reform things, that's a practical guide to how to get to it.
Okay. And yeah, Doug Wilson, a very timid, shy, and vanilla type of character from what I've heard.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right.
well, thank you so much, Jared, for your time. I can definitely link in the description, like a link to your blog, if you'd like me to. Would be more than happy
Sure.
to send people that way. But thank you so much for taking time to give some insights onto the Bible and how we're to live our lives, basically.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jared.